At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's GeneralG. Let's begin. Alor was usually fine with being dwarfed by his two Deathworlder friends. He was a pointy-eared creature of below-average stature for a bipedal, someone a passing human might call a tiny gray elf. Right now, he and his friends, all leaders of their respective species on the Deathworlder Council, halted in the middle of the food court, drawn by curiosity at the strange sight of the human ambassador consuming what looked like some kind of meat, arranged in a way that resembled a ritual more than a meal. The human sat alone at a corner table, methodically selecting pieces of flesh from an elaborate display on his tray and dipping them into a dark red liquid before bringing them to his mouth. The arrangement was peculiar, almost artistic in its presentation. Each morsel seemed placed according to some rule, creating a pattern that Alor couldn't quite decipher from this distance. "Do you think he's playing some kind of game with the food?" Alor asked, tilting his head to get a better view. His large, almond-shaped eyes narrowed in a display of curiosity. "I've seen ritualistic feeding ceremonies before, but this seems different." Lotharo, the tallest of the group, a Zibix with an elongated red head and at least 10 auxiliary optical organs scattered across his cranium that complemented the sight provided by his rather common and boring two-brow eyes, didn't reply to Alor's question. Instead, all 12 of his eyes fixated on the human's tray with an intensity that made Alor uncomfortable. "Wait," Lotharo began, his voice so low it barely masked the tremor running through it. "What do you think that flesh is from?" Before either of his companions could answer, Lotharo raised one clawed finger, the digit shaking visibly as it pointed toward the human's table. "Is that," his voice cracked as he spoke, "is that bottle of red thing he's adding to the flesh blood?" The question was hard to answer. Alor felt his own pulse quicken at the suggestion. Blood consumption wasn't unheard of among Deathworlders, but it was rarely done so publicly, and never with such casual ceremony. The implications were disturbing. The third friend, Lear, a brown and muscular Ixie, standing between them, let out a rumbling laugh that drew a few glances from nearby diners. His two long fangs, constantly wet with his acid saliva, gleamed dangerously as he spoke. "Well, there's one way to find out, isn't there?" He gestured toward the human with one massive hand. "We could go there and ask." Alor shot him a skeptical look. "Just walk up and ask what he's eating? What if it's something sacred? Or worse, what if it's blood and we're interrupting some kind of feeding frenzy?" "We're Deathworlders too," Lear countered, his voice taking on a note of pride. "This isn't the broad galactic council with those weak species that would run at the mere sight of blood. We've all eaten things that would make most sapients faint. How bad could this possibly be?" He had a point, Alor supposed. The Deathworlder Council prided itself on being composed of species from the galaxy's most hostile planets, beings who had evolved into environments so deadly that they developed immunities, strengths, and appetites that seemed almost supernatural to the softer species of the galaxy. If anyone could handle witnessing whatever bizarre meal the human was consuming, it should be them. "Come on," Lear continued, his enthusiasm building. "Nothing bad is going to happen if we just go there and ask what he's eating. Worst case scenario, he tells us it's private and we apologize and leave. Best case, we learn something interesting about this new species. The humans only joined the Deathworlder Council a week ago. This is exactly the kind of cultural exchange we're supposed to be having." Alor thought for a moment, weighing the wisdom of approaching the human. The logical part of his brain, which was considerable, given that his species had evolved as problem solvers and strategists, warned him that this could be a terrible idea. But then he remembered where they were. This was a public space in the Council's headquarters, with security monitoring every square meter, Cameras, guards, emergency response teams, all designed to prevent any incidents between species who might, under other circumstances, try to eat each other. The security measures suddenly made the whole thing seem less risky and more intriguing. What was the worst that could happen in such a carefully monitored environment? The human would be offended, they'd apologize. Some cultural taboo would be violated. They'd learn from it. That was the entire point of the Deathworld Council, to foster understanding between species who were typically too dangerous to interact with the broader galactic community. "All right," Alor heard himself say, surprising himself with the decisiveness in his voice. "Let's go ask." Lotharo's auxiliary eyes all swiveled to focus on Alor, creating a disconcerting effect, like being studied by a cluster of living jewels. "Are you certain? That red substance really does make me uncomfortable. The way it clings to the flesh pieces, the viscosity, the color. It's very similar to Zibik's blood, actually. And the thought of consuming—" "Oh, come on," Lear interrupted, slapping Lotharo on the back hard enough to make the taller alien stumble forward a step. "You're afraid of a little blood? I thought the Zibiks hunted the gray serpents of Zybar 7. Those things that can turn blood to acid with a single bite. And you're worried about some liquid in a bottle?" "I'm not afraid," Lotharo protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm simply exercising appropriate caution." "He's scared," Alor said to Lear with a slight smirk, joining in the teasing. It was rare that he got to be the brave one in any situation involving his much larger friends. The mighty Lotharo, who once stared down a council of predator kings, is frightened by a human's lunch. "I am not." Lotharo's 12 eyes narrowed, and Alor could see the moment when pride overrode caution. "Fine, fine. But I'm only agreeing because I want to know what flesh the human is eating. It's purely my personal curiosity getting the better of myself." "Sure it is," Lear said with a grin that showed far too many small teeth. "Come on, let's go before our new human friend finishes his meal." They began their approach slowly, weaving between tables occupied by various Deathworlder species. Alor noticed a pair of Krellians, massive, armored quadrupeds, giving them curious looks as they passed. A lone Vexian warrior, all 8 feet of scaled muscle and blade-tipped tail, watched them, showing predatory interest before returning to her own meal. As they drew closer to the humans' table, the 3 of them exchanged a look. It was a moment of shared uncertainty, Alor realized. Despite all their bravado, despite being leaders of their respective species on the Deathworlder Council, none of them actually knew the respectful way to interact with this new species called humans. They'd read the briefing documents, of course, basic physiology, atmospheric requirements, dietary needs, but knowing that humans came from a Class 13 death world and understanding their social customs were entirely different things. The human had just selected another piece of flesh from his tray when Alor made his decision. Despite being the smallest, despite usually deferring to his friends in physical matters, he found himself taking the initiative. Perhaps it was because his species valued directness, or perhaps it was simply because standing around staring was making him feel ridiculous. But Alor walked forward to the opposite side of the table. From this new vantage point, he could see the human's tray in much greater detail, and what he saw made his breath catch. The tray was covered with what looked like various cuts of meat, at least a dozen different varieties. They were so different in color and consistency that it was hard to believe they could all be from a single creature. Some pieces were pale, almost white. Others were deep red or purple. A few had a marbled appearance, while others looked almost crystalline in structure. It was like looking at a carnivore's art installation. "Excuse me," Alor said, keeping his voice respectful and clear. He'd learned long ago that being small meant he had to command attention through voice and presence rather than physical intimidation. "Are you a human?" He knew it was a somewhat silly question. Of course this was a human. The species was distinctive enough, even if you'd only seen pictures. But it seemed like a gentler way to start the interaction than immediately demanding to know what the other being was eating. The human looked up from his tray, and Alor got his first close look at those strange, forward-facing predator eyes. They were brown, warm, and seemed to hold a spark of amusement. The human appeared young by the standards described in the briefing documents, with short dark hair and a build that suggested both strength and agility, the kind of physique that came from a world that constantly tested its inhabitants. "Yes, I'm human," the being said, his voice pleasant and deeper than Alor had expected. He tilted his head, studying Alor with what seemed like curiosity rather than hostility. "Do you need something, little one?" Little one. Alor had been called worse, and the tone didn't seem condescending, more affectionate, actually. He was about to respond when Lotharo and Lear positioned themselves on either side of him, creating a small delegation before the human's table. As they settled into position, Alor noticed the human was watching something on a mobile device propped up against his water container. His translator caught a phrase from the device. "Like the video, and you will get a cookie," before the human paused the video with a quick gesture. Whatever entertainment humans enjoyed, it seemed to involve promises of baked goods. Alor could feel the discomfort radiating from Lotharo as his friend stared at the meats the human was consuming. All 12 eyes were fixed on the tray with an intensity that was almost comical, like a naturalist studying a particularly dangerous specimen in the wild. Lear, as usual, had no such hesitation. "We got curious about what you're eating," he announced with his typical directness. "Decided to come ask what it is. Hope that's not rude in your culture." Before the human could respond, Lotharo spoke up, his voice tight. "I know that it's common for various species to come here in the food court, and each of them prove themselves by using the food synthesizer, and then proceed to eat the strongest predator of their planet to show their strength." He paused, and Alor could hear the concern in his next words. "Is that what you're doing?" Alor blinked in surprise. He had never heard of this challenge before. Being very small often excluded him from the dominance displays that were so usual in the Deathworld or Council. The larger species had their own ways of establishing hierarchy, contests of strength and consumption that someone of Alor's stature simply couldn't participate in. It made sense that such a tradition would exist, though. Deathworlders were nothing if not competitive about proving their toughness. The human's reaction was unexpected. He threw back his head and laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the immediate area. Several nearby diners glanced over, showing interest. "Ha ha, something like that," the human said, still chuckling. "At least, that's how it started." Alor frowned, not understanding what the human meant. He stared at the food again, trying to make sense of the arrangement. That's when he noticed it. The pattern wasn't random at all. The small cuts of flesh had been carefully arranged to form something resembling a happy human face, complete with 2 pieces positioned as eyes, several more creating a nose, and the red substance from the bottle forming a curved smile, where the human would dip the pieces before bringing them to his mouth. It was simultaneously creative and deeply unsettling. "What do you mean by something like that?" Alor asked, unable to keep the curiosity from his voice. The human's smile widened, and he set down the piece of meat he'd been about to consume. "Well, see, I got challenged a few days ago by this big guy. Must have had 4 eyes. Can't remember the species name. To eat the biggest predator from my world. He was all confident, said I couldn't handle it. That humans were probably soft despite coming from a Class 13 Deathworld." The human's expression shifted to something that looked like mischievous pride. "So, I decided to surprise that guy and win some easy credits." He lifted his tray with both hands, angling it so Alor, Lotharo, and Lear could see all the details of each piece of meat. The arrangement was even more intricate up close, with careful attention paid to color gradients and textural contrasts. "This," the human announced with obvious pride, "was made with a custom code for the food synthesizer that my programmer friend created for me. It's actually a smiling face. You see it? Made with pieces of meat from every single death world in the galaxy." Alor felt his blood run cold. Every single death world? That was impossible. There were hundreds of classified death worlds in the known galaxy, planets so hostile that even brief visits required extensive protective equipment. The predators from these worlds were the stuff of nightmares, creatures that could tear through starship hulls. Some could survive in vacuum or dissolve flesh with their breath. But the human wasn't finished. His excitement was building, and he began pointing to individual pieces on the tray with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a particularly interesting hobby. "This piece here," he indicated a pale, almost luminescent chunk, "is from a glacier render from Frost 9. You know those things, massive apex predators that hunt in temperatures that would freeze most species solid. The meat has this interesting crystalline structure that stays cold even after synthesis, creates a really nice contrast with the warmer pieces." He moved his finger to a deep purple morsel. "This one's from a shadow stalker on Umbra 4. You know, those worlds with the 40-hour nights? These predators evolved to hunt in complete darkness, and their flesh has these bioluminescent properties. Doesn't do much after it's synthesized, but the flavor's incredible, kinda sweet with a metallic finish." The human continued his explanation, growing more animated with each piece. "The red marbled one is from a magma worm on Vulcan 12. Yes, actual volcanic planet, actual lava-swimming predator. Oh, and this little beauty," he tapped a piece that seemed to shift colors in the light, "is from a phase hunter on Zerab 3. Have you heard of those?" Alor stood frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. This human had created a meal consisting of the most dangerous predators from across the entire galactic Deathworld registry, not just from Earth, his own homeworld, but from every hostile environment known to spacefaring civilization. It was an act of such spectacular audacity, or insanity, that Alor couldn't decide whether to be impressed or horrified. Beside him, he could sense Lotharo's growing distress. All 12 of the Zybix's eyes were wide, several of them beginning to rotate in different directions, a clear sign of extreme agitation in his species. Lear had gone very still, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a tension that suggested he was reassessing every assumption he'd made about this encounter. The human, oblivious to the rising panic in his audience, kept going. "The mixture turned out to be incredible, honestly. Way better than I expected. Each piece has its own unique flavor profile, but when you combine them, there's this synergy that happens." He paused, reaching for the bottle of red liquid, and Alor felt his stomach clench. "And the bottle with the red substance?" The human didn't get to finish. "No, no, no, no," Lotharo said, his voice rising with each repetition. "I'm out of here!" The tall Zybix turned on his heel and fled. There was no other word for it. Lotharo, leader of the Zybix delegation to the Deathworlder Council, veteran of a dozen diplomatic incidents, survivor of 3 assassination attempts, ran away from a table in the food court like he was being chased by a fleet of warships. "Nope, no, absolutely not," Lear added, his own voice carrying a note of genuine fear that Alor had never heard from the usually fearless Ixie. "This is too much, way too much." And then Lear was running too, his heavy footfalls making the floor vibrate slightly as he hurried after Lotharo. The two of them stood out dramatically from the crowd, their size making their panicked retreat visible from anywhere in the food court. Several other diners had turned to watch, clearly wondering what could have possibly scared 2 of the council's most prominent members. Alor found himself standing alone before the humans' table, frozen in a mixture of shock and bizarre pride. Despite feeling utter revulsion at the food horror arrayed before him, the thought of consuming predators from every Deathworld simultaneously seemed like tempting fate on a cosmic scale. He had somehow, for once in his life, proven more resistant than his taller friends. He swallowed hard, trying not to think about the swell wafting from the tray, trying not to imagine the sheer concentration of deadly proteins and exotic compounds represented by that artistic arrangement of flesh. He tried especially hard not to think about the fact that simple food had just sent 2 leaders of the Deathworlder Council fleeing in terror. The red sauce?" Alor managed, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound calm. He stared into the human's eyes, which now reflected confusion and concern. "What is it?" The human blinked, glancing in the direction that Lotharo and Lear had fled, then back to Alor. A smile slowly spread across his face, and then he was laughing again. Not the polite chuckle from before, but genuine, body-shaking laughter that suggested he just understood something hilarious. The red bottle? He managed between laughs. That's just ketchup, buddy. It's made from a red fruit from Earth, tomatoes. It's sweet, a little tangy, and tastes absolutely amazing with just about anything. No blood, no predator extract, nothing scary, just ketchup. Ketchup, Alor repeated slowly, testing the word. A red fruit sauce. Yep, probably the most common condiment on Earth. We put it on everything. Well, I specifically do. It's basically the opposite of scary. The human picked up the bottle and showed Alor the label, which featured a cheerful illustration of the aforementioned tomatoes. Alor felt laughter bubbling up inside him, despite the disturbed feeling that still churned in his gut at the sight of all those meats organized in the shape of a human smiling face. It was absurd. The whole situation was absurd. Here he was, a tiny sapient who just watched two of the toughest beings he knew run screaming from artificial meat and a condiment made of fruit. I suppose, Alor said, letting a small laugh escape, I should probably introduce myself properly, since my friends seem to have abandoned me. I'm Alor, of the Kelvin delegation. Lucas Stone, the human replied, extending his hand in what Alor recognized from the briefing documents as a greeting gesture. Nice to meet you, Alor. Your friends okay? They took off pretty fast. They'll be fine, Alor assured him, though he was already dreading the conversation he'd have to have with them later. I think they just weren't prepared for the scope of your meal. It's quite an impressive display. Thanks. Lucas's enthusiasm returned immediately. Took us 3 tries to get the synthesizer code right. The first attempt turned everything into a kind of homogeneous paste. Tasted okay, but totally defeated the purpose. The second try got the flavors right, but the textures were all wrong. But this third version? Perfect. Alor found himself genuinely curious despite his lingering unease. Can I ask you something? How is it possible that you're able to eat all of those things? I mean, I understand humans come from a Deathworld, but consuming the apex predators from hundreds of other Deathworlds simultaneously seems extreme. Don't the different biochemistries cause problems? Don't the compounds react badly with each other? Lucas leaned back in his chair, that mischievous smile returning. Well, here's the thing about humans. We're true generalists about a lot of things. Our digestive systems evolved to handle just about anything organic. We've got this incredibly versatile metabolism that can break down and process a huge range of compounds. Obviously, there are limits. We can't eat radioactive materials, for example. But in terms of organic flesh from other species, he shrugged, usually not a problem. Usually? Alor echoed. Okay, pretty much never a problem as long as it's actual food and not like toxic waste. Lucas grinned. Honestly, we usually only avoid eating things we find cute, and even that's more of a cultural choice than a biological limitation. We can eat them, we just don't want to. Alor felt his analytical mind engaging with this information. That's fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint. What kind of planet would require such broad dietary adaptation? Lucas laughed, but this time it had an odd quality to it, like he was laughing at a private joke. Nah, it's just Earth. Very good planet, very tame. Nothing scary there at all. Alor looked at the human with undisguised distrust. Lucas's expression was so clearly disingenuous that even someone unfamiliar with human facial expressions could tell he was being less than truthful. You're joking, Alor said flatly. Maybe a little, Lucas admitted with a wink. Earth's not that bad. Sure, we've got creatures that can kill you in hundreds of different ways, but hey, at least we don't have phase hunters. This is the first time I'm talking with a human, Alor said, deciding to change the subject before Lucas could elaborate on Earth's apparently numerous death scenarios. Is there anything more I should know about humans being generalists? Lucas paused in the middle of reaching for another piece of meat, his expression turning thoughtful. I don't know. he said slowly, then added as he selected a piece and dipped it in the definitely not blood ketchup. I don't think this is very important, but we're very generalist when it comes to choosing our pets, too. Pets? Alor wasn't familiar with the term. Animals we keep for companionship, Lucas explained. He pulled out his mobile device again, swiping through it. Here, let me show you. The screen filled with images that made Alor's eyes widen. Humans, lots of humans, with creatures of various sizes and dispositions. Some of the animals were small and fluffy, looking harmless enough, but others were decidedly not. That's a Great Dane, Lucas said, pointing to an image of a human child standing next to what looked like a small horse with a dog's head. He swiped again. These are from off-world, though. Got more interesting once we joined the galactic community. See this? The image showed a human woman standing next to what Alor recognized with shock as a juvenile Corellian razorback, a creature known for its aggressive territorial behavior and armored hide that could deflect plasma fire. That's... Alor couldn't find the words. Oh, she's a sweetheart, Lucas said warmly. That's Ambassador Hilton's pet, actually, named Princess Sparkles. Apparently, razorbacks are really social if you raise them from hatching. Who knew? He continued swiping, and Alor watched in growing astonishment as image after image appeared. Humans with Vexian frost wolves. Creatures that should by all rights see humans as food. Humans with Ganymede cloud serpents floating beside them like living scarves. A particularly shocking image showed a human man in what looked like an embrace with some kind of crystalline entity that Alor didn't recognize. We're very, very, very adaptable, Lucas continued, his enthusiasm building as he shared his species' achievements. Once we figured out that most dangerous species are just misunderstood or just need the right approach, it became kind of a hobby. If not friend, then why friend-shaped, they say. And here's the real kicker. Everything is friend-shaped. The explanation continued for several more minutes, with Lucas pulling up articles, videos, and forum posts about humans successfully bonding with creatures from across the galaxy. Alor noticed they were beginning to attract a small crowd. Other Deathworlders who had overheard Lucas speaking had drifted closer, their curiosity piqued. A Vexian warrior he'd noticed earlier was now standing just a few feet away, her scaled head tilted with interest. 2 Krellians had paused their meal to listen. Even a normally solitary phantom from the Shadow Worlds had emerged from its preferred dark corner to observe the discussion. Not picky about exotic food, Alor said slowly, processing everything he'd learned. Not picky about exotic pets. He paused, a thought occurring to him that seemed almost too broad to be true. Humans must be the most adaptable species I've ever encountered. Lucas's expression shifted to something that Alor was beginning to recognize. It was the look that said, I have another thing I want to show you, which was perhaps the only human expression he could reliably interpret so far. Given how the previous revelations had gone, Alor felt a spike of apprehension. Well, Lucas said, his grin widening, since you mention it. He tapped at his mobile device again, and Alor watched as a new series of images appeared. These showed humans, both males and females, based on the physical differences Alor had learned from the briefing documents, in what looked very much like romantic relationships with Deathworlders of various species Alor recognized. There was a human woman with her arm around a male Zybix, both of them smiling at the camera. A human man holding hands with what appeared to be a Kelvin scout, one of Alor's own species, though the individual wasn't anyone Alor knew personally. Multiple images of human Vexian couples, human Krellian partnerships, even a few photographs of what the captions claimed were human phantom bonds, though how that worked given phantom biology was beyond Alor's comprehension. Yeah, Lucas said, his smile so wide it must have hurt. We're not choosy at all. The gathered crowd had grown larger, and Alor could hear the murmurs of surprise, confusion, and in some cases what sounded like interest from the various species represented. The implications were staggering. If humans were truly as generalist as Lucas suggested in diet, in companionship, in romantic partnerships, they represented something new in the galactic community. Lucas glanced at a timepiece on his wrist and let out a small sound of surprise. "Oh shit, I didn't realize how late it was getting. I've got a meeting with the Cultural Exchange Committee in 20 minutes. He stood, his height becoming apparent as he rose to his full stature. Alor had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. Lucas gathered his mobile device and began the process of cleaning up his meal, carefully returning the tray to the food court's recycling station. When he returned, he held out his hand to Alor in that same gesture from earlier. "This is called a handshake," Lucas explained, noticing Alor's momentary hesitation. "It's a human greeting and a sign of friendship. You grasp my hand, yeah, like that, and we move them up and down a few times. There you go. Perfect." The contact was warm, firm but not crushing, and oddly reassuring. Alor found himself appreciating the directness of the gesture. There was no ambiguity in a handshake, no way to misinterpret the intent. "I would love to have a little brave friend like you, Alor," Lucas said sincerely. "Your friends took off, but you stuck around even though I could tell that meal was freaking you out. That takes guts. If you ever want to grab lunch again, maybe something less intimidating next time, just let me know. I'm usually in the council building most days." "I'd like that," Alor found himself saying, and was surprised to realize he meant it. "Though perhaps next time you could warn me if you're planning to eat something that represents the collective nightmares of the galaxy." Lucas laughed that warm, genuine laugh again. "Ha! Deal. Next time I'll stick to something boring, maybe just Earth food." As Lucas walked away, weaving through the now dispersing crowd with casual waves and friendly nods to those he passed, Alor stood alone at the table and contemplated what had just happened. The being who had inadvertently scared away his two closest friends, leaders of their respective councils, warriors and survivors of worlds that would kill most sentients within minutes, had turned out to be quite friendly, enthusiastic even. There was something almost innocent about Lucas's excitement in sharing his species' achievements, like a child showing off a collection of interesting rocks. But Alor was also acutely aware that he now had a challenging journey ahead of him. He would need to find Lotharo and Lear, probably hiding somewhere in the council building, nursing their wounded pride and possibly their wounded stomachs from the stress, and somehow convince them to give Lucas another chance. It wouldn't be an easy conversation. Lotharo would need significant convincing to return to a location where someone had casually consumed flesh of every apex predator in known space. Lear would probably make jokes to cover his embarrassment, then avoid the topic entirely for several days. But Alor had a feeling it would be worth the effort. The Deathworlder Council existed to foster understanding between species too dangerous for regular galactic society. And if today had taught him anything, it was that humans might be the most dangerous of all. Not because of their physical capabilities or their tolerance for extreme foods, but because of their seemingly infinite capacity to adapt, to bond, to find common ground with anything and anyone. As Alor made his way toward the exit of the food court, he passed the tables where Lucas had been sitting. Someone had already cleaned and reset it, but Alor paused for a moment, remembering the sight of that carefully arranged tray with its smiling face made of cosmic nightmare fuel, garnished with what turned out to be fruit sauce. He laughed quietly to himself. In a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, leave it to humans to create something that was somehow both at once. Tomorrow, he would track down his friends and begin the process of reintroduction, this time preferably without anyone running away in fear.